Hello and welcome back. This is going to be chapter 18 about epistemic communities. This is mostly focused on how experts influence the discussion, I guess, about public policy, about how it's going to be crafted, about what goals are going to look like, that kind of stuff. All right. This is largely based on the work of Peter Haas. And again, well, not again, but most of this literature comes from sort of diplomacy stuff, international relations, um, economic, I don't know, and also like military diplomacy, high level discussions, these sorts of things. And basically, the theoretical underpinning here, or the major concept here, is that just like in the former chapter where we discussed there's a lot more role for or space for technical expertise to make its way into policymaking when there is a lot of uncertainty or a lot of technical complexity, right? Where maybe if you get it wrong, it could have devastating consequences, say like nuclear energy policy, environmental chemistry, these sorts of things, or where we just don't really have a lot of precedent and maybe it's like an entirely new thing, right? Let's say AI, right? We're not quite certain yet how to regulate AI. Europe has been leading the charge on this kind of stuff, but it's by no means sort of ossified at this point, right? Like we really don't have a whole lot of policy around this. And those two things, technical complexity and just base uncertainty, leave space for expertise, right? That's their theory. Okay. Section 18.2, epistemic communities and the politics of ideas. So what first is the definition of an epistemic community? They say that it is a group of professionals, often from different disciplines, that produce policy relevant knowledge about complex technical issues, right? And so it might be a high level, say, theorist, right? I know that like Bruce Boynton-Mesquita is often called on, the guy from NYU who does like game theoretic modeling, by the CIA, by the FBI, etc. Maybe experts at university levels in things like diplomacy, maybe experts from the field of economics, all of these sorts of things, right? Okay. And they also go on to say that there are four sort of elements of knowledge that we're going to talk about. And the first is norms. So this is just a shared set of normative beliefs that sort of provides a value rationale for the community. Okay. Number two, shared causal beliefs. This tends to be inside of the expert community and tends to be sort of derived from their analyses throughout history, um, and sort of serve, they say, as the basis for elucidating the multiple linkages between policy actions and desired outcomes, right? Because we've talked before about the possibility of negative externalities, right? Just recently, the last month or so, with the Iran war, um, the negative externality here was that the Gulf got shut down. Not the Gulf, but the Strait of Hormuz is sort of under lockdown. And it actually seems to have strengthened Iran because now they know they have this lever, right? And so these are the negative externalities that can come about if you don't sometimes have like experts in the room, right? And it's not just about the Iran war. It could be about economic fallout. It could be about environmental damage. It could be about long-term crop control. It could all kinds of stuff. Okay, the third sort of knowledge element is the shared notion of validity, right? And they say this is the intersubjective, internally defined criteria for weighing and validating knowledge in the domain of expertise, right? And so we've talked about before too, though, that sometimes these sort of elite knowledge groups are quite siloed, right? Um, and the research paradigm might be quite siloed. All of these problems, right? So sometimes these shared notions of validity could just be wrong because we have groupthink. Okay. And then finally, the final piece of knowledge is sort of the common policy enterprise, right? And they say this is a set of common practices associated with a set of problems to which their professional competence is directed, presumably out of the conviction that human welfare will be enhanced as a consequence. And so these are sort of just the rules in use rather than, and sometimes maybe the rules on paper, but more of the rules in use about how we discuss these things, about which things will even be brought to the table, etc. Okay. They ask actually, how do these epistemic communities influence actual policy making, right? And they offer three potential answers. They say, first, these experts can provide a cause effect linkage, right? And sort of provide advice on likely outcomes. Number two, they can provide a lot of nuance on the complexities and linkages, right? Which is, I think, maybe the one thing you truly build the more educated you become, right? A lot of nuance, a lot of understanding how these interlinked phenomena affect each other, the causal direction between these things, negative externalities that might appear or positive externalities that might appear, all of these sorts of things, right? And then third, they can sort of define what is the self-interest of the state, right? So the politicians and the policymakers do this, but the experts do this in some sense as well. Because especially on the diplomatic scene, a lot of it historically and seems to be sort of growing again has been this realist perspective, right? Where every state lives in this anarchic system. There is no supranational governance board to tell everybody what to do. And in that sense, it's a zero sum game. And you have to sort of propagate your own state and diminish others to gain relative advantage, right? And so policymakers and experts and diplomats, etc., can really help define what is the self-interest of the state, right? What are the outcomes that we want? Okay. Section 18.3, empirical analysis of epistemic communities. Uh, okay, this is where I'm going to sort of go off the rails and say, like, this approach has not been all that useful. We really haven't discovered much through this lens. And it's remarkably difficult to quantify, right? How do you put numbers on which expert is more important? Which um, which setting of discourse is more important, right? Because there are meetings about all of these things going on all over the place, all at once, right? Whose opinions matter, right? How do we measure that? How do you actually get true information from people who have classified access and rules on disclosure? Like they literally cannot even tell you sometimes what we're thinking, what our goals are, all of these sorts of things, right? And so, how the hell do you quantify that sort of thing? Um, and as the book sort of points out, there's very little evidence that these are all that influential to begin with. The little bit of methodological evidence that we do have suggests that this quote unquote epistemic community tends to be completely sidelined by NGOs and by big businesses, right? And so, if it doesn't even have an influence, why are we studying it, I guess? Finally, I would point out that often politicians or statecraft people or whatever it might be. They don't want to hear experts' opinions, right? Because it can undermine their own argument for their voters or their donors, or it can sort of, maybe the expert opinion doesn't play out like our political rhetoric. This is a difficult sort of paradigm to try and see through the veil, I guess. Okay, 18.4, theoretical challenges. Even the author says, like, this subfield has not really gotten any better in more than a generation. That's troubling. And then the author goes on to claim that the guy who founded this entire subfield, right, used inflated cases, like perfect cases, the ideal case, to try and build out this entire model. And that is also really troubling science, right? Picking and choosing cases is not science. It's arguably like propaganda, or I don't know. It's concerning, right? Okay, so what is her answer, or the author's answer to cleaning some of this up theoretically and from a data perspective or a analysis perspective? She says, first of all, we need much better sort of definition of and measurement of dependent variables, right? Like, what are we measuring? Is it policy change? Is it policy effectiveness? Is it the number of minutes that these experts get to sort of, give their piece? I don't really know what we're even trying to explain, right? What is the variance in policy making in something? I don't know, that we're trying to explain, and how do we put a number on that? I don't really know. Okay. Number two, the introduction of models of learning, right? Which might actually be helpful. Um, because we do know a lot about sort of learning, changes of opinion, dissemination of information. We know a lot of that stuff through like business journals and networking and communications and education theory and all of these sorts of things, right? So we need to bring in some of these micro foundations of how the human brain operates and how we make decisions and how people learn to describe these sort of um, these phenomena, these what happens in these rooms. I don't know. Okay, and then finally, we need to sort of describe the interactions between the epistemic community and the policy elites, and bring in some of that learning knowledge to understand how that network work plays out. Okay, I kind of crapped all over this chapter. In a sense, it deserved it. So, okay, thanks for being here, and I'll see you for the next one.